Now, BMW's recently announced R12 GS looks like another great option on the retro-inspired Scrambler market, but with bikes not in dealers till summer 2025, well, is it actually worth holding on for? In this video, we'll look at it side by side with the most similar bike in the category, the Triumph Scrambler 1200 XE, to see how they compare blow by blow. Now, being built upon the R12 platform, the new GS gets the same air and oil cooled 1170cc boxer twin as the other bikes already in the R12 lineup. Peak power is pretty handy at 109 horses, and it comes in pretty low as well at 7,000 RPM. And then usable torque has always been a big strength of this particular engine layout, and so it gets 115 Nm peak at 6,500 RPM. Perhaps a little more important though than those out-and-out performance figures, certainly in the retro market, is the fact that it gets a totally different, unique sound and feel. And while the droning sound at the exhaust is a little bit love-hate, what you've got to say is that it does stand apart from the rest of the market, which is largely full of parallel twins with 270-degree cranks. Then the way the two cylinders protrude from either side of the engine does help to keep the center of mass nice and low, so it has a positive effect, I guess you could say, on the handling. And also, you've got the practicality of a shaft drive as opposed to the chain on the Triumph, and it also helps to give it a very direct feel to the throttle response. Now, the Triumph, on the other hand, gets the 1200 high torque variant of the Bonneville parallel twin, and although it is ever so slightly larger in capacity to the BMW, it is actually a little bit down on peak power. This one gets 89 horsepower at the same 7,000 RPM, but I reckon that's down to the fact that they've really primarily tuned this engine for torque, with the peak of 110 Nm being made quite a bit lower at 4,250 RPM. Pretty much all of the Bonneville bikes have this really satisfying, meaty bottom end to them that makes them really easy to ride, and so clearly that was the intention with this one as well. I also really like the fairly weighty feel to this engine. It's got a big crank in it, and so along with that really low torque, it does play into this feeling of unstallability. And while the note at the exhaust is very much commonplace nowadays, not only on the retro market but the entire motorcycle market, with it being a parallel twin with a 270-degree crank, I would still say generally Triumph do a great job of tuning the exhaust system for a really nice sound, and this one's got the same deep bassiness which feels quite rich. It is also worth a quick word as well on the physical form factor of these two engines, which both have their pros and cons. With the Boxer sticking out a bit, you could say on the positive side, as I've mentioned, it keeps the center of mass low. It does help to keep your legs a little bit warm when it's chilly as well, and it can also make the bike a little easier to pick up if you do drop it because it doesn't go quite so far over. But then of course those cylinder heads are a little bit vulnerable if you do drop it off road, and also it's not the narrowest bike in terms of threading it through gaps. The Bonnie Twin, on the other hand, is a bit more like a normal engine, much more compact if that's your sort of thing, and also you could say it's a little more out of harm's way even if you're not running crash bars. So this one, it's really quite close. There's not a massive difference between them in terms of performance. Perhaps the BMW's a little better, but I think a more influential factor in your decision should probably be the character of the engine and how it feels and what your sort of personal preference is. The Triumph is like a great implementation of what's become a super common engine layout, whereas the BMW is a little bit more quirky and unusual, and some people may like that. Now, on the chassis front, both of these bikes have been built to be, or at least appear, fairly off-road capable. And honestly, there isn't actually a great deal to separate them. You've got the tubeless spoke wheels with the 21-incher up front and the 17 at the rear. Both get fully adjustable suspension with plenty of travel, and there's around 240 or 250 mil of ground clearance on each. The wheelbase is like 1,580 mil on the BMW, 1,570 on the Triumph. The weight, with the 15-ish litre tanks on both fully fueled up, comes in at 229 kilograms for the BMW and 230 for the Triumph, which is effectively the same out on the road. So I think in the broad spectrum of all the motorcycles that are available on the market, these are two bikes that are really close to being the same, but there are a couple of little details which might help you choose between the two. The Triumph, for example, has twin shocks at the rear as opposed to a monoshock on the BMW, and it also gets the more travel of the two with 250mm front and rear as opposed to the 210 and 200 on the R12 GS. Braking perhaps is like the biggest differentiator between these two bikes though, with a very sporty, I'd say road bias setup on the Triumph with the Brembo stylemas and the radial master cylinder, whereas the R12 GS actually uses much softer, gentler 2-pot Brembo calipers that I guess are there to give you much easier progression when you're looking to brake on low grip surfaces, i.e. off-road. So this one could be a good thing or a bad thing, really depending on where you like to ride, with the Triumph stylemas being really good if you are riding quicker on the road, but then again, in my experience, they do feel a little bit grabby at lower speeds, and that might put you off, like I said, when you're riding off-road. Another factor that might be important to you, especially if you ride off-road, is the fact that the BMW is available with an Enduro pack, and amongst a whole bunch of different features, one of the upgrades is an 18-inch rear wheel as opposed to the 17-incher that comes as standard, so a little better off-road performance and also potentially a slightly better choice of off-road specific tyres. So again, remarkably similar bikes in terms of the general specs and dimensions. We may find a bigger difference when we get to ride the BMW later this year, but on the face of it, the Triumph seems to be the better setup for road riding with those more sporty brakes, whereas the BMW should be a little more forgiving off-road with the braking and also has that option for the bigger rear wheel. Now for both bikes, one of the drawbacks of having so much ground clearance and travel in the suspension is that you do end up with a really quite tall seat height that's probably going to alienate, shorter riders or anyone who's not confident on a tall bike. The Triumph, for example, sits at 870mm in the seat, and while you could spec down to the more accessible road-biased X version of this bike, which comes in with a much more friendly seat height of 820mm, well, you'll sacrifice quite a bit in terms of the technology and the level of spec, with it being, £1,500 cheaper. Now, the R12 as standard is a little bit lower at 860mm, although still, on the tall side. And if you do fit the optional rally seat, it does go up by another 15mm, which makes it 875. Then there's that Enduro pack with the bigger rear wheel, which naturally lifts the tail end of the bike. And so that would make it another 20mm taller, so 880mm with a standard seat and 895mm with the rally. That Enduro pack as well also comes with a handlebar riser that lifts them by 20mm, and so generally you'd say it's probably the bike that's been more so designed with off-road riding when you're stood up in mind, especially if you're tall enough or confident enough to fit that rally seat, which of course makes it easier to go between being sat or stood up. The other thing to consider here is whether you're ever going to want to take a passenger, because the Triumph comes with a twin seat and passenger pegs as standard, whereas the GS actually comes with a solo seat and no pegs, and you either have to spec up a passenger package for an extra £205, or I believe maybe the Enduro pack gets you the pegs as well, but I'd have to double check that. So again, I think the Triumph is set up more so to be a versatile all-rounder with on and off-roading in mind and also two-up riding, whereas the BMW gives you more versatility if you want to spec it in different ways of seat heights, and you can get different pegs and an adjustable brake lever and the handlebar risers, providing you've got the funds to spec all that stuff up. And also, if you want to take a passenger, you'll need a little cash for that as well. Onto the tech though, and the Triumph really looks like a modern day adventure bike in this regard, just wrapped up in that retro clothing, with a fully featured TFT dash through which you can manage 6 riding modes, 2 of which are off-road specific, cornering ABS and traction control, cruise control, keyless ignition, and also if you pay for the connectivity accessory, you've got Bluetooth connectivity with the dash for your phone and headset, so you can handle calls, messaging, media playback and navigation all through the switchgear and dash. It is a slightly unusual dash design. It's kind of like a round TFT in the middle with 2 small ones down either side. but I think it's actually really quite nice to use, and you could say they've done a good job of kind of matching the design of the dash to the retro look to the rest of the bike. Then you've got LED lighting all round, backlit switchgear, and the usual suspects in the options catalogue like heated grips, tire pressure monitoring, power sockets, and auxiliary lights. Now the BMW on the other hand goes more so down the retro route with a simple single analog clock with a small LCD set into it for managing some of the techie features. In terms of the actual rider aids though, well it is, largely comparable with the Triumph. You get the different riding modes of Rain, Road and Enduro as standard, the Enduro Pro mode which is a bit more aggressive if you're willing to pay some extra, cornering ABS and traction control as well as keyless ignition as standard, and then there's a big selection of stuff in the accessories catalogue, so heated grips, a quick shifter, cruise control, hill start control, a cornering headlight, tire pressure monitoring, and their connected ride smartphone feature. On top of that, there's also the option to switch out the analog dash for a really small digital TFT display, which you might want to do if you prefer something that looks a bit more modern. It kind of has a bit of a custom look to it as well, although I do suspect that quite a lot of people will be more than happy to stick with the original analog clock. Overall though, if you're someone who does like your tech, you've probably got to say that the Triumph is the better offering of the two as standard before you start getting stuck into the accessories, because you get the TFT dash and the cruise control without having to fork out any extra. Now, styling is totally subjective, and this is really going to come down to personal taste, so let me know which of the bikes you prefer the looks of down in the comments below. But I will say the Triumph is a little more traditional perhaps, with the twin shocks, the more rounded fuel tank, the high-mounted Scrambler style silencer, whereas the GS is a bit more angular in the tank and also looks more aggressive perhaps with the high front mudguard, and especially with that taller rally seat fitted. Both for me are bikes that I'd be very happy to open the garage to in terms of the looks, and my only real criticism of either of them is the fact that with the Scrambler 1200 XE, you've got 4 paint jobs to choose from in 2025, but 3 of them are effectively black with small variations upon that theme. The GS, well, it does come in black as the base model, but also you've got that classic BMW rally option with the white paint and then the 2 tones of blue and the red highlights. And then if you want something completely different, there's the fancy Option 719 in sand, black and red. So yeah, I think BMW have done a better job of catering to a broad range of tastes. And I think for my tastes, probably the GS in the M Sport colours is overall the nicer bike to look at. Thing is though, you're going to have to be happy paying a little bit more for the privilege, with the Triumph coming in at a relatively bargainous £13,295, whereas the BMW starts at £14,085, so almost £800 difference. I'd also say with the paint jobs on the Triumph, well, it's £350 extra for a couple of the more premium paint jobs. The Icon Edition, which is limited to this year, is another £800, whereas the GS, well, the black is standard and then it's £300 more for the white. But then the Option 719 is only available as a pack, which includes all the billet Option 719 finishing parts, some chrome exhaust headers, and so if you want that paint job, the only way you can get it is paying the best part of £2,000. Then you've got over £200, like I say, for the privilege of carrying a passenger. Cruise control is only available as part of the Comfort Pack at £1,010. The extra Enduro Pro riding mode is only available as part of the £750 Enduro Pack, and that Micro TFT Dash is another £125. And like I said earlier, the Scrambler gets cruise control as standard, a TFT Dash, and also the entirety of the 6 riding modes all come as standard. So I think even at the starting price, the Triumph looks the better value. And then when you do spec them up, like for like with the same features, well, the difference looks even more substantial. Still, this is one of the least price sensitive parts of the market, I guess, where the character and the way the bike makes you feel and the way it looks are perhaps bigger factors when it comes to most people's buying decision. Maybe when we get to ride the BMW, it'll warm the soul in a way that justifies the extra expenditure, but otherwise I think it's really the character of the engine being so different that's going to be important to most people, and then yeah, that difference in price. As always though, I'd love to know which bike you'd pick, so do let me know down in the comments below, and if you haven't seen it already, I'll put our comparison of the Scrambler 1200 X and XE on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Do hit subscribe for more of the latest motorcycle comparisons like this right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.